is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Each Adventure channel. My name is Josh, and in today's video we're going to talk a little bit about the DRZ400S. One of the comments that I get a lot on some of my older DRZ videos is, you know, should you buy a DRZ? Should I buy a DRZ? I'm looking for a bike. You know, would you recommend buying the DRZ400S? And so, to start off with, let me just say that I'm riding a 2012 DRZ400S. I've got about 8,200 miles and some change. It hasn't been ridden as much in the last year and a half or so. But when I first got it, I rode the heck out of it. So DRZ400S is Suzuki's dual sport. Used to be right in the middle of the lineup until they axed the DR200. And so now this is the, you know, smallest quote-unquote dual sport that you can get from Suzuki. And so I've ridden this bike all over Southern California. I've ridden it on the highway, I've ridden it on hard enduro trails, I've ridden it on stuff like this. So I'm pretty knowledgeable as to what its capabilities and what its limits are. And so I wanted to talk about those things in this video today so you can make a decision as to whether or not a DRZ400S might be a good bike for you. And so to start off, I'm going to go ahead and say that the DRZ400S is somewhat of a unicorn bike. There is no bike on the market that is quite like it. There's bikes that are bigger than it, there's bikes that are smaller than it, but there's really no 400cc dual sport that exists, especially at the price of the DRZ. Now, some will argue that the Honda CRF 450L or XL or RL or whatever they call it now, some will argue that that's like the competitor to the DRZ, and I'm going to disagree. You know, the Honda has proven itself to be a pretty good bike, but there are still a lot of differences between it and the DRZ. The first being the maintenance intervals. Honda still claims that it's something like 600 miles or so for oil changes, and I don't know off the top of my head what the valve clearance checks are, but the DRZ is not like that at all. The DRZ, I think, is spec'd for oil changes around like 2,000 miles, and valve clearance checks are, I believe, something like 14,000 miles. So it's a big difference. You know, people will argue this up and down all day long, basically saying like, well, you know, the Honda's more of a dual sport than it is like a performance enduro street legal bike like a KTM, and that's just not true. The engine is the same engine that they use in the 450X, which is the cross-country racing bike, but it does have quite a few modifications to make it more street friendly. But those modifications are more in like the chassis, you know, like the injected swing arm and the aluminum subframe and like the titanium tank and all that other stuff. So they did a lot to make it more street friendly, so it doesn't feel, you know, as much. If you've ever ridden a 450X, it's a full-on dirt machine. So I don't consider them in the same class. The 450L puts out a lot more power than the DRZ does. It's just not in the same category of bike, in my opinion. You know, with that being said, there is really no other bike like the DRZ, so why would you want to buy one? So let's start with what it's good at. Number one is going to be those maintenance intervals. It's a very easy bike to own and maintain, not having to worry about valves or oil changes, you know, every time you go on a long extended ride. Like on this ride here, I'm probably going to be pushing 100 miles, maybe more. You know, if I was riding this every single day, I wouldn't want to have to worry about oil changes and stuff like that every 600 miles. So it's definitely more versatile in that regard, because the maintenance intervals are much longer than your performance-oriented dual sports. At number two, it's a heavier dual sport, which has its pros and cons. The pro side is that it's very stable. You can ride this on the freeway. It's not the most comfortable thing, but it is possible. And that extra weight just really helps it feel planted, and you know, you don't feel as intimidated by passing vehicles that blow you around I also own a Beta 390 RRS for reference, and I do not like riding that thing on the freeway. It's not fun. You get blown around everywhere, especially if you have like knobby tires. Right now on my DRZ, I have 50/50 tires on it, which is, you know, great for mixed riding. You sacrifice some stuff in the dirt, but you gain it back on the highway. So if you're doing real dirt, you know, true dual sport riding, and you're riding out to your destinations, and you're not just using it to connect trails, the extra weight of the DRZ really helps make it feel very solid and very planted when you're on the road. Another good thing about the DRZ is it gets relatively decent gas mileage, depending on how you ride it, depending on how you have it modified. But usually you can get anywhere from, you know, 40 to 50 miles per gallon, which isn't too bad. Another thing that the DRZ has going for it is that there are a lot of aftermarket parts, so it is relatively cheap to own and maintain, because nearly every company makes stuff for the DRZ. And, you know, with that stuff, you can make the bike as much of a dirt bike as you want it to be, and as much of a street bike as you want it to be. But that's, I think, where we start getting into the cons a little bit, because as great as the DRZ is as an all-around bike, it's not particularly great at anything, to be honest. It's just an okay bike. It's okay at being a road bike. It's okay at being a dirt bike. So I guess that kind of makes it great at being a true dual sport. But I want to kind of talk about what I mean here. So let's get into some of the cons of the DRZ. So the first con that I want to talk about is the seat height. So the DRZ is a relatively tall bike, which is fine if you're used to just riding dirt bikes. But as a dual sport, it makes it very awkward when you're riding it around on the street, because you're just tall enough to where, like, you know, certain situations are kind of uncomfortable, because like when you come to a stop, you got to lean it to one side. It's not the end of the world. Like if you're used to riding dirt bikes, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're looking for like an all-around bike and you want it to also, you know, feel relatively normal on the road, I think it could put a lot of people off. A lot of people will try to put a lowering link on it, or they'll put like the Seat Concepts low seat on it. I have a pretty short inseam, but about 30 inches, and you know, I'm used to riding taller dirt bikes, so I've gotten pretty used to it. But when, you know, when I am riding around, especially in slower terrain or on the road, sometimes it's still a little intimidating with the seat being as high as it is, because that also plays into the next kind of con of the DRZ, and that is the weight. For a dirt bike and a dual sport, especially of this type, right? It's a more aggressive type of dual sport because it's got pretty decent suspension, but it's heavy. You start getting into slower, more technical terrain, or you need to pick it up, or you're trying to just maneuver it around on the street. You know, it takes some getting used to because of the weight. And not only is it heavy, but the weight is centered pretty high. I also owned a CRF400S for a while, and even though on paper they weighed almost the same, the DRZ feels so much heavier than the CRF400S does. The DRZ doesn't carry its weight that well. It carries its weight very high, and so it feels very top heavy. And so like I can feel the weight shifting around as I make these corners. I feel that top heavy weight. And again, like, it's something that you can get used to, but it's not the greatest thing, right? So it goes back to what I was saying, is it's not particularly a great dirt bike or street bike, because in both scenarios it's a little bit top heavy. You're already sitting up so high on it because of the seat height, plus like the extra, you know, top heavy weight, and it just feels like top heavy. You can just feel it. So that's just one more consideration, you know, when it comes to buying a DRZ. So the next thing I want to talk about is the gearing. So the DRZ only has 5 gears, and so I have mine geared stock. And in the stock gearing on the highway, you can probably reach speeds of about 90 if you're lucky. And that is like 4 full wide open pin throttle. And it's not the most comfortable thing. There's no wind protection, so you know, going that speed while not only being illegal is, you know, not all that comfortable. I'd say you're probably the most comfortable on this bike at around 65, both in terms of like RPMs and just overall wind comfort. You start getting up into the 70s and you're just getting blasted by wind, and it's not the greatest experience. So, you know, while the DRZ will do it, you know, you really have to ask yourself, like, what kind of riding am I going to do? Am I going to do this and just kind of cruise mountain roads? Are you going to trailer your bike to the trailhead and then ride it from there? Or are you going to ride on the highway a long ways and then try to go hit the trails? Because I've used this bike as a commuter to not only ride to work, but also go ride trails afterwards. And I can tell you from experience that, you know, a 30-mile commute on the highway to go then ride another 30 so miles after work to hit the trails, and then ride 60-ish miles to come home is not very fun on this bike. It will definitely do it, but it's not the best experience. It is fatiguing on the highway riding for that long with no wind protection, at those speeds, just being buffeted by the wind, you know, the whole entire time. And while having the gearing stock helps with the RPMs, you do lose quite a bit, like if you want to ride technical trails. And so if you want to ride aggressive like you would a performance dirt bike, you know, the DRZ is more than capable of doing that, but with the stock gearing, it's going to leave a lot to be desired. And so, and again, this kind of goes back to my point, is that, like, if you want the DRZ to be an all-around bike, then you have to make compromises either on the road or on the street. And so what I've kind of come to realize over the course of my motorcycle riding career, I guess you could say, is that there really is no magic bike that does everything. You're never going to find a bike that will cruise 80 on the highway in relative comfort, where you're not getting blown around by either cars or the wind, and then also be able to hit the dirt and ride it as aggressively as you would like a performance dirt bike or dual sport. There's going to have to be some compromises made somewhere. But that being said, the DRZ, I think, is the closest you can come to that balance. Again, like I said, it's not great on the street, it's not great in the dirt, it's just good in both of those areas. But if your overall goal is to do a bit of everything, then that is something where the DRZ truly shines. And if you have the right expectations, then for sure, like hands down, this bike should be at the top of your list. You could literally ride this all over. I mean, I've gone on long rides with my Beta, and it's fine, but it's not the same. And like, never in a million years, I've done it one time and I won't do it again. Like, I won't take the Beta on the freeway. Maybe for like an exit or two, but I won't take it and ride it out to a trailhead like I will with this bike. And so to bring it back full circle and to answer the question, you know, if you are looking for a motorcycle, given all the options that we have now, should you buy a Suzuki DRZ400S? And I think the answer to that question ultimately is, it depends. If you truly want a bike that is good at doing everything, but not really great at doing anything, then the DRZ should probably have a spot at the top of your list. It's powerful enough to ride at highway speeds, even with the gearing, although not comfortable, but it's also dirt bikey enough to take it on everything but like the hardest single track trails, and still having the capability of being able to ride to get there. But that being said, it is a heavy bike. There are a lot of other options these days, like the Honda CRF300L or the Kawasaki KLX300. Those would also be good choices if you're looking for a dual sport that can do a little bit of everything. I think one of the areas where the DRZ shines, though, is it's got better suspension. So if you really want to take it and make it more of a dirt bike, then you can turn this thing into a beast of a dirt bike. If you wanted to change the gearing and make it a lot more street and maybe do more of like a supermoto type bike with it, you can actually go higher on the gearing and turn it into one heck of a street bike. But as a true compromise machine that can do a little bit of both and do both things relatively well, I think it's really hard to beat the DRZ, because there is really no other bike like it currently on the market today. The 300s that I mentioned don't have the same power or suspension that the DRZ does. DRZ still has what some might be the benefit of being carbureted. Some people want fuel injection, but I've never had an issue with this carb once, ever. And in both situations, I mean, you can mod it to your heart's content, and you can turn it into a full-on adventure bike. You can turn it into a full-on dirt machine. There's people that race DRZs. You know, it really is kind of an open canvas in terms of what you want it to be. So with all that being said, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on the DRZ400. Would you buy one? Are you considering buying one? Do you have any questions that I didn't cover in this video? A lot of times people ask, you know, is it really worth it to buy a DRZ now? And I think the answer ultimately comes down to what your expectations are. If you're just getting into riding, I think there are other options available now that would make a better first-time beginner bike, especially if you're looking to do true dual sport riding. But if you want something that's truly versatile and you can kind of change the use case depending on what kind of riding that you're going to do, the DRZ is great for that, because like I said, you can gear it lower and have one heck of a dirt bike. You can gear it higher and have one heck of a street bike, or you can kind of keep it in the middle and have something that does relatively well at everything, but that's not specifically great at any one particular thing. Given what you get for the price, it's hard to overlook the value of the DRZ when you compare it to how expensive other types of motorcycles have gotten over the last few years. I mean, they were already crazy, but I mean, you're looking at, you know, $15,000 or so for like a new KTM these days. That's just insane. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think, and let me know if you have any additional questions. I'd be happy to answer them. I guess I've been riding this bike for quite a while. I'm very familiar with what it can and can't do. I try to cover most of it in this video, at least as my thoughts as a rider. It is heavy, it is old, it's definitely not modern. The ergonomics aren't super great, but it's a very capable bike that will do 95% of whatever you decide to throw at it. And if you're a decent rider, probably 100%. But anyways, guys, that about does it for me. And I just want to say thank you for riding along with me today. If you like this video, please give me a like down below. If you're new here, please subscribe. I'd like to do adventures like this on a weekly basis, and I would love to have you along for the ride. But anyways, guys, until next time, please be sure to have fun, take care, and ride safe. And I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, be sure to get out there and have adventures of your own. And I will see you guys next time. Later!
Thanks for watching the video. If you liked what you saw, please let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to hit that like button. If you are new here, please subscribe to see more adventures just like this one. For information about my riding gear or the various ways you can help support the channel, please check out the links below or head over to www.eachadventure.com. I'll see you in the next one.